The stepmother kicked us out. A girl with 9 siblings told a millionaire, but something terrible happened next. Watch until the end. Comment what you thought of this story with a rating from 0 to 10. I really want to know if you liked my story, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The sun was rising lazily over the hills of Asheville when Lily opened her eyes for the last time in the only house she had ever known. At 4 years old, she didn't fully understand what it meant to never come home again. But she felt the weight of goodbye in the heavy air of the cluttered room she shared with her 9 siblings. Leo, at 12, the oldest of them all, had been awake for hours, silently organizing the few belongings they could carry. "Get up, Lily," he whispered, gently touching his little sister's shoulder. "We need to leave before she wakes up." Brenda, the stepmother who had thrown them out 3 days after their father's funeral, was snoring loudly in the next room. The sour smell of cheap whiskey permeated the entire house, mixed with the odor of spoiled food and piled-up garbage. Ever since Richard Stevens had passed away suddenly 2 weeks ago, the 42-year-old woman had turned their simple but clean home into a living hell for the children. Leo carried Benny, just 2 years old, in his arms while adjusting an old backpack on his shoulders. The youngest boy still didn't understand why they had spent the last week eating only the scraps Brenda left behind, nor why she screamed at them whenever they made any noise. Alex, 10 years old, dragged a suitcase far too heavy for his age, filled with the clothes of all his younger siblings. "Chloe, hold Daisy's hand and don't let go," Leo instructed in a low voice. The 8-year-old girl immediately obeyed, taking the hand of 6-year-old Daisy, who in turn was cradling Rosie, just a year old, in her fragile arms. Oscar, 5, was trying to calm the 3-year-old twins, Claire and Asher, who were beginning to whimper with hunger. "Where are we going, Leo?" Lily asked, rubbing her eyes with her small, dirty hands. Her teddy bear, the only toy she owned, was clutched tightly against her chest. "I don't know yet, Lily, but anywhere will be better than here," the boy answered, trying to sound braver than he actually felt. The Stevens family had always been humble. Richard worked as a custodian at Lincoln Elementary School and managed to support his 10 children with a great deal of effort and creativity. Despite all the financial difficulties, the children had never gone hungry or felt unprotected. Their father was a kind man who came home every evening humming a tune and always had a story to tell before bedtime. Everything changed when he brought Brenda home 6 months before his unexpected departure. The woman had appeared in their lives as a promise of help, claiming she wanted to build a family and care for the children. Richard, a widower for 3 years and overwhelmed with so many responsibilities, saw her as an opportunity to give his children the maternal care they so desperately needed. But Brenda never showed any genuine affection for the children. From the very first day, she treated them like burdens, constantly grumbling about the amount of food they consumed and the noise they made. When Richard fell suddenly ill and had to spend a few days in the hospital, she barely visited her husband, preferring to spend her afternoons at the corner bar. Now, with Richard buried for only 2 weeks, Brenda had shown her true colors. The day after the funeral, she gathered all the children in the living room and coldly announced that she had no obligation to raise them, that the house was too small and that they needed to find another place to live. "You're not my children," she declared, her eyes red from drinking. "I married your father, not you. Now that he's gone, I have nothing more to do with this situation." Leo had tried to argue, to remind her that their father always said Brenda loved them like her own children, but she laughed with contempt. "Love? You really believed that? I was here for your father and now he's gone." The 3 days that followed were the worst of the children's lives. Brenda locked the refrigerator with a padlock, leaving only stale bread and water for them. When Rosie cried from hunger, She screamed that she couldn't stand the noise anymore. When the twins wet the bed out of fear and anxiety, she made them sleep on the cold kitchen floor. On the morning of the eviction, Brenda appeared drunk in the living room at 5 in the morning, screaming that she didn't want to see any of them there when she returned from the bar that afternoon. "Get your things and get out of my house. You have until 3 o'clock to disappear from here." Leo had spent the entire day trying to find a relative who could help, but Richard's family was small and everyone had their own struggles. Aunt Beth lived in Chicago and barely had enough money to support her own children. Uncle Jerry was unemployed and living off the charity of friends. Now, at 6 in the morning, the 10 children were walking along the dusty road that cut through the Asheville hills, with no destination in sight. Leo carried Benny, who felt heavier with each step. Alex dragged the suitcase over the uneven pavement, the fabric already beginning to tear. Chloe held tightly to Daisy's hand, who staggered under the weight of Rosie. The twins, Claire and Asher, cried from hunger and exhaustion, their faces red from the sun that was beginning to heat up. Oscar tried to cheer them up by singing a song their father used to sing, but his thin voice was lost in the morning wind. Lily hugged her teddy bear and walked in silence, her big eyes fixed on the horizon, as if expecting to see her father appear around the bend. "Leo, my feet hurt," Daisy complained after 2 hours of walking. "Hang on a little longer, Daisy. We'll stop to rest soon," Leo lied, knowing there was no safe place to stop. The 12-year-old boy felt the weight of responsibility crushing his small shoulders. It was up to him to find food for his siblings, up to him to find a place to sleep, up to him to protect them all. But no matter how hard he tried to appear strong, inside he was just as scared as Lily. It was when they spotted the candy factory at the end of the road that everything changed. The simple but well-maintained building exuded a sweet aroma that made the children's stomachs rumble loudly. A middle-aged man was leaving the parking lot, adjusting his tie as he walked toward a black car. James Foster, 52, had just come out of a difficult meeting with suppliers. As the owner of the small Appalachian Sweets candy factory, he constantly faced challenges to keep the family business competitive. That morning, he had discovered that one of his biggest clients had cancelled a major order, and his mind was occupied with numbers and strategies. It was Benny's cry that made him stop and look at the group of children on the road. The scene he saw left him paralyzed. 10 dirty and tired children, clearly abandoned, carrying their few belongings in a silent procession of despair. The smallest one, a little girl with curly hair, was watching him with big, frightened eyes, hugging a tattered teddy bear. Something inside James's chest broke at the sight. Without a second thought, he walked toward the group, feeling an inexplicable compulsion to protect these helpless children, never imagining that this decision would change his life forever. "Are you all right?" James asked, crouching down to be at Lily's level. The girl instinctively recoiled, clutching the bear to her chest, but her eyes revealed a mixture of fear and hope that deeply touched the businessman's heart. Leo stepped forward, assuming his role as protector of his siblings. "We're just looking for a place to stay, sir. We won't cause any trouble." The forced maturity in the 12-year-old's voice made James feel a tightness in his chest. He looked at the group more closely. The dirty and torn clothes, the bare feet of some, the thin faces of hunger, and especially the frightened looks he knew all too well. They were the same looks he himself had worn at 7 when he lost his parents in an accident and had to live with relatives who barely tolerated his presence. "What are your names?" he asked gently. Leo hesitated for a moment before answering. "I'm Leo, and these are my siblings." He pointed to each one. Alex, Chloe, Daisy with Rosie in her arms, Oscar, the twins Claire and Asher, Benny and Lily. "And where are your parents?" The silence that followed was more eloquent than any answer. Leo looked down, fighting back tears. "Our father. He passed away 2 weeks ago." and our stepmother kicked us out this morning." James closed his eyes for a moment, painful memories flooding his mind. He knew exactly what it was like to be a helpless child with nowhere to go, depending on the kindness of strangers to survive. The difference was that he had been lucky enough to find people who, even without showing affection, at least gave him shelter. These children didn't even have that. "Have you eaten anything today?" The children shook their heads in unison, and Benny's stomach rumbled loudly, as if answering the question. The 2-year-old began to cry softly, and Leo rocked him in his arms, trying to calm him. "Come with me," James said, making a decision that would change everything. "Let's get some food in your stomachs." Helen Perry, 60, was seasoning the beans for lunch when she heard the gate open. As James's housekeeper for 15 years, she knew her employer's schedule perfectly. He shouldn't have been back so early, and certainly not with so much noise from voices. When she looked out the kitchen window, she almost dropped the wooden spoon she was holding. James was in the yard, accompanied by 10 dirty and ragged children, the smallest one clinging to his pants as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "What is all this, James?" she asked, stepping out the back door with her hands on her hips. "Helen, these children need help. They're orphans and were kicked out of their home by their stepmother," he explained, immediately noticing the look of disapproval on the housekeeper's face. "James Foster, you can't just bring 10 strange children into your house. You don't know where they came from, what kind of trouble they might bring." Leo felt his face burn with shame. He knew they looked suspicious, dirty and desperate as they were. He made a move to gather his siblings to leave, but James gently held his arm. "Helen, look at them. They're just hungry and scared children. What would you do if you were one of them?" The housekeeper looked at the group more closely. Lily stared at her with curiosity, not fear, as if recognizing a motherly figure in her. Rosie whimpered softly in Daisy's arms, and the twins hid behind Oscar, intimidated by the adults' argument. "At least let them eat something," James insisted. "We can talk about the rest later." Helen sighed heavily. In 15 years of caring for that house, she had seen her boss go through very difficult times. She knew the pain he carried since the loss of his family years ago, knew how he had isolated himself from the world and dedicated himself obsessively to his work. Perhaps that was why, against her better judgment, she nodded in agreement. "All right, but just for today. Tomorrow, you figure out another solution for this." The children were taken to the utility area, where Helen improvised a group bath while their clothes were washed. James watched from a distance, impressed with the efficiency with which Leo organized his younger siblings, making sure everyone was clean and safe. "How old are you again?" he asked Leo while they waited for the clothes to dry. 12, sir. And you've been taking care of all of them alone since you lost your father?" Leo nodded, trying not to show the extreme exhaustion he felt. "My dad always said I was the man of the house when he wasn't around. Now that he's gone forever, I have to take care of everyone." James felt a deep admiration for the boy. At 12, he carried a responsibility that many adults couldn't bear, and he did it with impressive determination. Lunch was served in the kitchen, a simple meal of rice, beans, and chicken that seemed like a feast to the children. They ate in respectful silence, savoring every bite as if it were their last. Lily, sitting next to James, offered little pieces of chicken to her teddy bear between spoonfuls. "What's your teddy bear's name?" James asked, trying to break the silence. "Teddy," she answered in her soft voice. "Daddy gave him to me when I was little. He said Teddy would always protect me." "And has he been protecting you?" Lily thought for a moment before answering. "I think so. When Aunt Brenda yelled a lot, I would hug him really tight, and I'd stop being scared." James exchanged a meaningful look with Helen. The housekeeper, despite all her initial resistance, was also being touched by the children's innocence and good manners. They thanked her for everything, helped clear the plates, and behaved better than many adults she knew. After lunch, the children settled in the living room, exhausted from the morning's walk and their first full meal in days. One by one, they fell asleep on the sofa, and the cushions Helen had scattered on the floor. Only Leo remained awake, watching over his siblings with eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "You need to rest too," James said, sitting down next to the boy. "I can't. What if Aunt Brenda comes looking for us? What if the police show up? I need to be awake to protect my siblings." "You're safe here, I promise." Leo looked directly into James's eyes, trying to gauge if he could trust this man who had appeared like an angel in their lives. "Why are you helping us? We're strangers. We could be dangerous." James smiled sadly. "Because I was once a child alone in the world, Leo, and I know how much it hurts when no one lends a hand to help." It was at that moment that Stephen Barnes, the factory's accountant for 15 years, arrived for their scheduled monthly meeting. A thin man of 58, with thick glasses and a smile that never reached his eyes, Stephen had a habit of showing up at James's house unannounced, claiming that urgent business matters couldn't wait. "James, we need to review the contracts for the—" "What is all this?" he asked, stopping abruptly at the sight of the children sleeping in the living room. "Stephen, these children needed help. It's temporary." The accountant observed the group with an expression that James couldn't quite decipher. There was surprise, yes, but also something else, as if he were calculating the implications of the situation. "Are you sure this is a good idea? Orphan children can bring a lot of legal complications, and financial ones too." "Don't worry about that now, Stephen. We can talk about the contracts tomorrow." But Stephen didn't seem willing to let the matter go. His eyes remained fixed on the children, especially on Leo, who had woken up at the sound of their voices and was watching the man with a strange sense of familiarity. "These children, where exactly did they come from?" the accountant asked, and there was something in his voice that made James frown. "They're the children of a custodian who recently passed away. The stepmother kicked them out," James explained, not noticing how Stephen's face paled slightly at the information. Leo kept looking at the man with glasses, an uneasy memory struggling to surface in his mind. There was something familiar about that face, that voice, but he couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. It was as if he had seen this man before, in circumstances his young mind refused to fully recall. "Well, I think I'd better be going then," Stephen said quickly. "We'll talk tomorrow, James." After the accountant left, the house fell silent again. James watched the sleeping children and felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the feeling that his life had a purpose beyond work and loneliness. But he had no idea that his decision to help these children would place him at the center of a web of lies and betrayals that was just beginning to unravel. The first few days of the children's stay at James's house passed in a careful routine, as if everyone were testing the limits of this new reality. Helen, despite her initial resistance, found herself setting up makeshift bedrooms and preparing meals for 12 people instead of one. The children behaved like angels, helping with everything they could and speaking only when spoken to. It was on the 5th morning that the first crack in this fragile peace appeared. James was having coffee when he saw a familiar car parking in front of the gate. Brenda got out of the vehicle with determined steps, her hair disheveled and her face red with a mixture of anger and a hangover. "Where are my children?" she shouted, banging on the gate with enough force to wake the entire neighborhood. Leo, who was helping Helen hang clothes in the yard, froze at the sound of his stepmother's voice. Instantly, all the children hid behind the housekeeper like frightened little birds seeking protection. James left the house and walked to the gate, keeping it closed between him and the furious woman. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you? You know very well how you can help me. Those children were stolen from my house, and I want them back right now." "Stolen?" James kept his voice calm, but his fists clenched. "From what I understand, you kicked them out of your house. That's none of your business. I'm their legal guardian now that my husband is dead. I have rights." Brenda showed a crumpled piece of paper she took from her purse, waving it in the air as if it were a weapon. "Here's the document that proves they belong to me. Richard signed everything properly before he died." James took the paper through the bars of the gate and examined it carefully. It was a custody document that looked legitimate, but there was something strange about the signature. It looked too shaky, as if it had been made by someone very sick or forced. "This document seems to have been signed just a few days ago," James observed. "Wasn't your husband in the hospital at that time?" Brenda's face turned even redder. "He signed it at the hospital. He was worried about the children's future and wanted to make sure I would take care of them." "Funny," said a voice behind James. It was Leo, who had approached despite his obvious fear. "My dad never said anything about signing papers, and when we visited him in the hospital, he could barely hold a glass of water." "Insolent boy! You don't know anything!" Brenda pointed her finger at Leo through the bars. "Your father personally sought me out to sign these papers. He knew I was the only one who could take care of you." But Leo shook his head slowly. "My dad would never have left us with you. He knew how you treated us. The last time we talked, he said that if anything happened to him, we should seek help elsewhere." The fury in Brenda's eyes turned into something more dangerous, desperation. "It doesn't matter what you think you know. The law is on my side. These children are coming back with me today." It was at that moment that Alex, 10, came out from behind Helen and joined his older brother. "Leo, tell Mr. Foster about the envelope." Leo hesitated for a moment, looking at James as if to assess whether he could trust him completely. Finally, he nodded and ran into the house, returning a few minutes later with a yellowed, stained envelope. "When Aunt Brenda kicked us out, I managed to grab this from my dad's room. It was hidden at the bottom of the drawer, along with other important papers." James opened the envelope and found several documents that made his blood run cold. There were copies of loan contracts with exorbitant interest rates, signed just a month before Richard's death. The creditor was identified as S. Barnes, Stephen Barnes, his own accountant. "Where did you get that?" Brenda screamed, trying to grab the papers through the bars. "You have no right to go through my husband's things." But there was more in the envelope, a handwritten letter in Richard's shaky script addressed to whoever finds these papers. "If anything happens to me, please protect my children. I made a terrible mistake trusting the wrong people. The man, Stephen, offered me money when Rosie got sick and I needed to pay for the hospital. But the interest was impossible. Now he's threatening to take my house if I don't pay. Brenda is not who she seems. She only got close to me because this Stephen asked her to. Don't leave my children with her, please." The silence that followed was deafening. James reread the letter twice, each word striking his chest like a hammer. Stephen Barnes, the man he had trusted for 15 years, had orchestrated a plot to destroy a simple family. And worse, he had used Brenda as bait to get close to Richard. "That's a lie," Brenda shouted, but her voice sounded desperate now, no longer furious. "Richard was delusional in his last days. He didn't know what he was saying." "The letter is dated 3 months ago," James observed coldly, "long before he got sick." Brenda tried a different approach, her voice becoming pleading. "Listen, Mr. Foster, I know it looks bad, but I really do care about these children. Maybe we can come to an agreement. Stephen told me you're a generous man." "Stephen said what?" James interrupted, his voice dangerously low. Brenda realized too late that she had revealed something she shouldn't have. Well, we talked about the children's situation, and he mentioned that. When did you talk about this?" "Last night." she admitted, confirming James's worst suspicions. "He called me after he saw the children here at your house. He said I should come get them today." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place in James's mind. Stephen had recognized the children the day before because he already knew them. He had been the one to orchestrate the whole situation, the predatory loan, Brenda's approach to Richard, probably even the way the custody document was signed. "Get off my property," James said, his voice laced with an authority that made Brenda recoil. "And don't come back here. You can't stop me from taking my children. I have legal rights." "With forged documents? I doubt it very much." James carefully put away the papers Leo had found. This evidence clearly shows there was a conspiracy to blackmail these children's father and force him to sign documents under duress. Brenda turned pale. "You can't prove any of that." "Yes, I can, and I will." James looked directly into the woman's eyes. "If you show up here again or try to bother these children in any way, I will personally take all this evidence to the proper authorities." After Brenda left, visibly defeated but no less dangerous, James gathered the children in the living room. They watched him with big, scared eyes, clearly traumatized by the confrontation. "You don't have to worry about her ever again," he said gently, "but I need to ask you some questions about this man, Stephen. Leo, you said he seemed familiar to you yesterday. Can you remember where you saw him before?" Leo closed his eyes, concentrating. "He used to come to our house sometimes, always at night, and he always made my dad very nervous afterward. Dad would send us to our room when he arrived, but, well, sometimes we overheard their conversations." "What did you hear?" "The man talked about money my dad owed. He said he would take our house if he didn't pay. And one time—" Leo paused, his face pale with the memory. "One time, he told my dad that Aunt Brenda was there to help, that she would take care of everything if something happened to him." Alex nodded vigorously. "I remember too. He said that Aunt Brenda would get our house when Dad died, and then she would give it to him." Indignation burned in James's chest like fire. Stephen had planned everything meticulously, blackmail Richard to death, use Brenda to gain legal access to the family's assets, and then take everything for himself. It was a cruel and calculating plan that used orphaned children as pawns in a dirty game. But there was one question that bothered him deeply. Why would Stephen go to the trouble of concocting such an elaborate scheme for a simple custodian's house? There was something more to this story, something he didn't yet understand, and it was then that Lily, who had been silent throughout the conversation, hugged her bear Teddy and whispered something that would change everything. The man with the glasses touched Teddy's tummy when Daddy got sick. He said he was looking for something Daddy hid. Leo tensed up. "Lily, what do you mean?" He opened Teddy's seam and felt around inside, but he didn't find what he was looking for. The little girl hugged the bear to her chest. "Daddy said what he was looking for was in the place where we planted friendship." I didn't understand. James felt a chill run down his spine. If Stephen was looking for something specific that Richard had hidden, it meant there was much more at stake than just a simple house. And if that something hadn't been found yet, Stephen would be back to look for it, and this time he wouldn't be as polite as Brenda. The morning after the confrontation with Brenda, James woke up with a steely resolve. Lily's words about the place where we planted friendship echoed in his mind, mixed with fragments of memories struggling to emerge. There was something familiar about that phrase, something that bothered him like an itch he couldn't scratch. He decided it was time to investigate Richard Stevens's past more deeply. If Stephen was willing to orchestrate such an elaborate conspiracy, there were important secrets hidden in the life of the simple and humble custodian. As he was making coffee in the kitchen, Helen approached him with a worried expression. "James, I need to talk to you about something." "What is it, Helen?" The housekeeper hesitated, nervously fiddling with her apron. "It's about Stephen. There's something I never told you because I was afraid of losing my job." James stopped stirring his sugar and looked at her intently. "You can tell me. For years, Stephen would come here when you weren't around and go through your personal papers. He said it was for accounting matters, but he would go through drawers that had nothing to do with the company. And he always asked about your parents, about the things they left for you." The revelation hit James like a punch to the gut. "Why did you never tell me this?" "Because he caught me once taking some cash from the company to pay for my sick brother's medicine. It was a small amount of money, James, I swear, and I always planned to pay it back. But my brother was very ill and Tears started to stream down the 60-year-old woman's face. "Stephen said if I ever told you about his visits, he would tell you about the money. I couldn't lose this job." James sat down heavily in his chair. For 15 years, Helen had been like a mother to him, taking care of his house and his life with absolute dedication. The idea that she was being blackmailed in his own home filled him with a cold, calculating anger. "How much money did you take? $3,000 over 2 years. I know it's a lot, but—" "Helen," James interrupted gently, $3,000 in 2 years is less than I spend on coffee in a month. You should have come to me directly." "I was ashamed," she sobbed, "and Stephen said you would never forgive a breach of trust." "The only traitor here is Stephen," James said firmly, "and now I understand why he was so interested in my parents' documents." It was at that moment that Leo appeared in the kitchen, carrying Benny in his arms. The 12-year-old boy had woken up earlier than his siblings and had overheard part of the conversation. "Mr. Foster," he said shyly, "can I ask something? Did your parents know my dad when they were young?" The question caught James off guard. "Why are you asking?" "Because last night, when I was trying to understand what Dad meant about planting friendship, I remembered a story he told me. He said that when he was young, he worked at the old textile mill with a very good friend. They always had lunch together in the factory garden, where there was a very big oak tree." James's heart stopped for a moment. "An oak tree?" "Yeah. Dad used to say they planted a friendship under that tree, because that's where they got to know each other better and became real friends. His friend's name was John, George, a name like yours." "James," he murmured, feeling the memories flood his mind like a broken dam. "His name was James." Leo nodded energetically. "That's it. Dad always spoke of his friend James with great affection. He said he was a good boy who had lost his parents early and dreamed of having his own factory one day." James stood up abruptly, his legs trembling. Richard Stevens. The shy, dedicated young man who had worked alongside him at the Carolina textile mill when they were both just 17. The boy who always shared his lunch with him under the old oak tree in the factory garden. The friend who consoled him when he learned he would be an orphan with no inheritance because his parents had died without leaving a will. "My God," he whispered. "Richard. It was Richard." "You remember him?" Leo asked, hopeful. "I do. We worked together for almost 3 years, until the factory closed. Your father he was the best friend I had back then." James ran his hands over his face, trying to process the revelation. "But after the factory closed, we each went our own way. I managed to save enough money to open the candy factory, and we never saw each other again. Dad always said he wished he could find his friend James again," Leo said softly. "He used to say you made a pact when you were young, that if one of you ever got rich, you would help the other if they needed it." Tears began to stream down James's face. He remembered that pact perfectly. 2 scared, orphaned kids, promising they would never leave each other helpless, and now he was discovering that his old friend had died just a few miles away, struggling financially, while he lived comfortably, completely unaware. "Leo," he said in a choked voice, "your father left something hidden in the garden of the old textile mill. I'm sure of it." "How do you know?" "Because I know your father. If he said the truth was where we planted friendship, he was talking about that oak tree. He was always very literal with his words, even when we were young." Helen, who had watched the entire conversation in silence, dried her own eyes. "James, the old factory was demolished 5 years ago. They built a public housing complex in its place. But maybe the oak tree is still there," Leo said hopefully. "Dad always said it was a very big, strong tree." James made an immediate decision. "We'll go there today. But first, I need to make sure you're all safe here." Just then the house phone rang. James answered and heard the nervous voice of Robert Miles, the family lawyer for years. "James, I need to speak with you urgently. I received a very strange call from Stephen Barnes this morning. He's claiming that you've kidnapped 10 children and is asking me to represent him in a custody action." "He's doing what?" "He says he has documents proving the children legally belong to their stepmother and that you're holding them against the legal guardian's will." "James, this is very serious. He could get a court order to retrieve them." James looked at Leo, who was watching him with big, scared eyes. "Robert, I need you here at the house now. I have evidence that Stephen is involved in a conspiracy against these children." "What kind of evidence?" "Documents that prove blackmail, coercion, and possibly forgery of official documents." "And Robert, I found out that these children's father was my best friend when we were young. I had a moral obligation to protect them." There was a silence on the other end of the line before Robert responded, "I'll be there in an hour. And James, don't let those children leave the house until I arrive." After hanging up the phone, James gathered all the children in the living room. They huddled around him, sensing the tension in the air. "Kids," he said in a soft but firm voice, "you're going to have to stay home today. We have some problems to solve first." "Is it because of us?" asked 8-year-old Chloe, her eyes welling with tears. "No, my dear. It's because there are some very bad adults who want to hurt you, and I won't allow that." Lily approached him, holding her bear teddy. "Mr. James, are you going to stay with us forever?" The simple, direct question from the 4-year-old girl cut James to the heart. He looked at those 10 little faces that had brought life and purpose to his empty house, and he knew that no matter what it cost, he would fight for them. "Yes, Lily, I'm going to stay with you forever. I promise." But even as he made that promise, James knew that Stephen wouldn't give up easily. The accountant had invested too much time and effort in this plan to simply accept defeat. And if he was willing to use the legal system against them, it meant he had cards up his sleeve that he hadn't shown yet. The truth that Richard had hidden in the place where they planted friendship was starting to seem more crucial than ever, because James was sure that, whatever that truth was, it was the only thing that could protect the children from Stephen for good. Robert Miles arrived at James's house with a grave expression that foreshadowed bad news. An experienced lawyer of 62, he had seen many complex cases throughout his career, but the situation unfolding before him had nuances that deeply concerned him. "James, the situation is more complicated than I imagined," he said, pulling a thick folder from his briefcase. "Stephen isn't just alleging kidnapping. He has documents that seem to legitimize Brenda's custody of the children. But we have evidence that those documents were forged," James protested, showing the papers Leo had found. Robert carefully examined both the custody documents and Richard's letter and loan agreements. "This evidence is important, but we're going to face a problem. The word of orphaned children against a respected accountant in the community." "Respected?" James nearly shouted. "The man is a blackmailer." To the law, until we prove otherwise. He is a reputable professional. Robert sighed heavily. And there's one more thing. Stephen is claiming that you've had psychological problems since your wife's death, that this obsession with saving children is a symptom of mental instability. James's blood ran cold. He's trying to have me declared unfit. He's trying to create a scenario where your custody of the children seems inadequate and dangerous for them. It was at that moment that Leo, who had been listening from behind the door, ran into the room. "Mr. Miles, I remembered something very important." The lawyer looked at the boy with interest. "What is it, son?" "Before my dad got sick, he recorded a conversation. I saw him hide an old tape recorder behind the living room radio when the man with the glasses came over." Robert straightened up in his chair. "What kind of conversation?" "The man with the glasses and Aunt Brenda talking about forcing Dad to sign papers. They didn't know he was recording." "Where is this recording?" Leo made a face of frustration. "I don't know. When Aunt Brenda kicked us out, I couldn't find the recorder. But I remember Dad once said that his most important things were always in the safest place he knew." James and Robert exchanged significant glances. "The garden of the old factory," James murmured. "Exactly," said Leo. "Dad always said secrets should be kept where true friendship was born." Robert closed the folder decisively. "Then let's go there. Now." The drive to the old site of the Carolina textile mill was made in tense silence. James drove with his hands tight on the steering wheel, while Robert studied old maps of the area, and Leo watched anxiously out the window. The place where the factory once stood was unrecognizable. Rows of small, identical houses occupied the space that James remembered as a bustling industrial complex. But there, at the back of the property, exactly where his memory indicated, a centuries-old oak tree still stood majestically, its thick roots protected by a low fence. "That's it," James said, pointing to the tree. "We always had lunch under it." They approached the oak tree, and James felt a wave of nostalgia. He could almost see himself and Richard, two 17-year-old boys, sharing dreams and fears under the generous shade of that tree. Dad used to say that when he buried something, he always did it on the east side of the tree, where the sun rises first, Leo remembered. James knelt on the east side of the oak and began to dig with his hands. The earth was compacted, but after a few minutes, his fingers touched something hard. It was an old cookie tin, wrapped in plastic to protect it from moisture. Inside, they found a small cassette recorder, 2 sealed envelopes, and a faded photo of 2 young men smiling under the oak tree. "That's us," James whispered, touching the photo with trembling fingers. "Me and your father." Robert took the recorder. "Let's see if it still works." They returned to the car, and Robert managed to get the device working. The recording was clear, despite the age of the tape. Stephen's voice echoed through the car. "Richard, you have no choice. You owe $40,000 now, with interest. Either you sign the house over to Brenda, or I'll call in the debt and you lose everything anyway." Richard's weak voice replied, "But if I sign this, my children will be left with nothing if I die." "Your children will be well taken care of," said Brenda's voice. "I promise I'll treat them like my own daughters." "I don't believe you," Richard murmured. "I know you're planning something. You've known each other for a long time, haven't you? This was all planned." There was a pause before Stephen replied, with a coldness that made James clench his fists. "Planned or not, you're going to sign, because if you don't, I'll tell everyone that you stole money from the school where you work." "I never stole anything." "Who's going to believe you? I have documents that prove you embezzled funds from the school lunch program. Very convincing documents." The recording continued to reveal the sordid details of the plan. Stephen had forged evidence of theft to blackmail Richard, forcing him not only to sign over the house, but also other documents that would give Brenda total control over any inheritance that might exist. But the most shocking part came at the end of the tape. "And what if Richard finds out about the money his father left hidden?" Brenda asked. "He'll never find out," Stephen replied. "Old James Foster Sr. died before he could tell his son about the inheritance he hid, and Richard never knew that his friend was the son of the man his father helped hide a fortune during the factory's bankruptcy." James stopped breathing. His father had hidden an inheritance, and Richard knew about it. Stephen's voice continued. "When I found out that Richard was friends with James Foster when they were young, I realized he might know the hiding place. That's why we needed to get close to his family. If we can get the information, we split it 50-50. And what if he doesn't know anything? Then at least we get the house and whatever he leaves for the kids. But I'm sure he knows something. James's father hid a fortune in gold before he died, and he only told 2 friends, Richard's father and my own father." Robert turned off the recorder with trembling hands. "James, your father hid gold." I never knew that," James stammered. "My parents died when I was 17, right after the factory closed. They never spoke of any inheritance." Leo picked up one of the sealed envelopes. "Can I open it?" James nodded, still in shock from the recording's revelations. Inside the envelope was a letter from Richard, written in his careful handwriting. "My dear friend James, if you are reading this, it means something has happened to me, and my son has managed to find you. Your father told me about the gold before he died, and he made me promise to tell you if we ever met again. He hid 20 gold bars in the basement of the house you lived in as a child. He said it was to secure your future, but he died before he could tell you. The house was sold after you became an orphan, but the gold should still be there. Stephen Barnes found out about it through his father, who was a friend of your father's. He is blackmailing me to find out the exact location. Don't let him hurt my children. They are all the good I have in this world. Your eternal friend, Richard Stevens." The second envelope contained a hand-drawn map, showing exactly where the gold was hidden in the basement of James's childhood home. Robert was the first to speak after the long silence. "James, this recording and these letters are devastating evidence against Stephen. We can charge him with blackmail, conspiracy, forgery, and attempted extortion." "But what about the gold?" Leo asked innocently. James looked at the boy and smiled for the first time in days. "The gold belongs to you, Leo. Your father kept this secret to protect you and to protect me. It's the inheritance Richard wanted to leave for his children." "But the house was sold," Robert reminded him. "How will we recover the gold?" "One thing at a time," James said, carefully putting away all the documents. "First, we'll use this evidence to stop Stephen for good. Then, we'll find a way to get back what's ours." But as they drove back home, none of them noticed the dark car following them at a safe distance. Stephen had found out where they were, and now knew that his worst fears had come true. They had found the evidence that could destroy him, and he wasn't willing to let that happen without a fight. When they arrived back at the house, an unpleasant surprise awaited them. 2 official cars were parked in front of the gate, and a man in a suit was talking to Helen in the front yard. The children were huddled behind the housekeeper, clearly frightened. "What the hell is going on here?" Robert muttered, getting out of the car quickly. The man in the suit approached them with a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. James Foster, I'm Charles Evans, a social worker. We've received a report that there are minors in an irregular situation at this residence." James felt his blood boil. "What kind of report?" "Allegations that these children are being held here against the will of their legal guardian, and that you do not have adequate conditions to care for them." Robert stepped forward, pulling a wallet from his briefcase. "I'm Robert Miles, Mr. Foster's attorney. I'd like to see the court order authorizing this intervention." Charles hesitated for a moment before handing over the papers. Everything is in order. The accountant, Stephen Barnes, presented documentation proving that Mrs. Brenda Stevens is the legal guardian of the children, and she is very concerned for their well-being. "That's a lie," shouted Leo, running toward James. "Aunt Brenda kicked us out. She doesn't care about us." "Son, I know it can be confusing," Charles said in a condescending tone, "but sometimes adults make difficult decisions for our own good. Your aunt is very sorry and wants you back." Lily began to cry, hugging her bear Teddy tightly. "I don't want to go. Mr. James is good to us." Robert quickly examined the documents and frowned. "This order was issued based on incomplete information. We have evidence of forgery and blackmail involved in obtaining this guardianship. You will have the opportunity to present that evidence in court," Charles replied, but his voice sounded less and less convinced. "For now, I have to carry out the order." Just then, a white van turned onto the street and stopped behind the official cars. To everyone's horror, Stephen Barnes got out of the vehicle, accompanied by Brenda, who seemed to have dressed up for the occasion. "My children!" Brenda exclaimed with a theatrical performance of motherly relief. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" The children instinctively hid behind James and Helen, their reaction more eloquent than any words. Even Charles seemed to notice the genuine fear in their eyes. "Mr. Barnes," Robert said in an icy voice, "what a coincidence to find you here." Stephen nervously adjusted his glasses. "I just came to support my client in a difficult time. These children have been through a terrible trauma, being separated from their legal guardian." "Legal guardian?" James laughed bitterly. "You mean the woman you used as bait to blackmail these children's father?" Stephen's face paled. "I don't know what you're talking about." Robert pulled the recorder from his briefcase. "We have a very interesting recording, Stephen. Want to hear it?" The accountant took a step back but maintained his composure. "Recordings can be easily manipulated these days. They have no legal value." "This one does," Robert said firmly, "and we also have documents that prove your entire conspiracy." Charles, who had been watching the interaction with growing discomfort, intervened. "Gentlemen, regardless of any dispute between you, I have an order to carry out." "One moment," said a firm voice behind them. It was Dr. Cassidy, the doctor who had treated Richard Stevens in his final days. "Sorry to interrupt, but I heard the Stevens children were here." James turned, surprised to see the doctor. "Dr. Cassidy, how did you know we were here?" "Helen called me when you left, worried about this whole situation." She looked directly at Charles. "Mr. Evans, I've been a doctor for 20 years, and I personally treated these children's father before he passed away. I have important information about this family." "What kind of information?" asked Charles, clearly relieved to have a professional medical opinion. "Richard Stevens came to me 2 weeks before he died, very worried about his children's future. He told me he was being blackmailed by an accountant and that his wife was involved in the scheme." Brenda stepped forward, furious. "That's a lie. Richard was delusional because of his illness." "Actually, no," Dr. Cassidy replied calmly. "I have detailed notes from our conversations. Richard was lucid and very specific about the threats he was receiving. He even asked me to be a witness to something if necessary." "A witness to what?" Robert asked. The doctor opened her bag and took out a sealed envelope. "He gave me this, saying that if anything happened to him, I should deliver it to the person who took care of his children." She handed the envelope to James, who opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a handwritten confession from Richard, detailing the entire blackmail, and a formal declaration naming James Foster as the preferred guardian of his children, based on their old friendship. Richard found out that James was the son of his old friend from the factory a few weeks before he died, Dr. Cassidy explained. "He told me the whole story about their father's friendship and the hidden gold. He said if anything happened to him, James was the only person he would trust to take care of his children. Stephen was visibly nervous now. That has no legal validity. A sick man can write anything. Yes, it does have validity, said Robert, examining the document. It's a declaration of express will, dated, signed, and witnessed by a medical professional. And Richard wasn't sick when he wrote this. It was 2 weeks before the first symptoms appeared. Charles looked at the documents, then at the children clinging to James, and finally at Brenda and Stephen. Mrs. Stevens, can you explain to me why the children seem to be so afraid of you? They're confused, Brenda replied quickly. Children sometimes react badly to change. That's not true, shouted 8-year-old Chloe, finding the courage to speak. She was mean to us. She didn't give us food and she always yelled. Aunt Brenda locked the refrigerator, Alex added. And the man with the glasses came over at night to talk to Dad about money. 5-year-old Oscar pointed a trembling finger at Stephen. He touched Lily's teddy. He said he was looking for something Dad hid. Charles crouched down to be at the children's level. Do you prefer to stay here with Mr. Foster or go with Mrs. Stevens? Here, here, they all shouted in unison. Clinging even tighter to James, the unanimous and desperate reaction of the children was the deciding factor. Charles stood up and looked directly at Stephen and Brenda. I'm sorry, but I cannot in good conscience remove children from an environment where they clearly feel safe to hand them over to someone who terrifies them. But the court order, Stephen protested. The court order was issued based on information that now proves to be dubious, Charles replied firmly. I will recommend a full investigation into this situation before taking any action. Robert smiled for the first time in hours. Charles, as an experienced social worker, you know that the well-being of the children always comes first, correct? Exactly. And it's very clear where they feel protected here. Stephen and Brenda exchanged desperate glances. Their carefully crafted plan was crumbling before their eyes. But James knew that men like Stephen didn't give up easily. He had invested too much time and revealed too many secrets to simply accept defeat. This isn't over, Stephen muttered to James as he headed back to the van. You have no idea what you're getting into. On the contrary, James replied calmly, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. And this time, I won't let you hurt innocent people. When the official cars and Stephen's van finally left, the children erupted in hugs and tears of relief. But James knew that this had only been the first battle in a war that was far from over. Stephen knew about the existence of the gold now, and greedy men were capable of anything when a fortune was at stake. 2 weeks after the social workers' failed intervention, life at James's house had found a quieter rhythm, but tension remained in the air like a storm about to break. The children started attending the local school, where they quickly adapted and made friends. But James hired private security after discovering that Stephen had been seen lurking around the school at dismissal time. Robert worked tirelessly to formalize the legal guardianship of the children, but the process was being systematically delayed by appeals and objections filed by a law firm from Atlanta, the same firm, they later discovered, that received monthly payments from a shell company linked to Stephen. It was on a rainy Thursday that the situation took an unexpected turn. James was reviewing contracts at the factory when his phone rang. The number was unknown. Hello? Mr. Foster? This is Mary Ann. I work at Horizon Realty here in Asheville. Do you have a minute? Yes, go ahead. It's about the house on Maple Street, number 247. You expressed interest in buying it, didn't you? James frowned. No, I've never expressed interest in any house. There was a pause on the other end of the line. That's strange. We have a document here signed by you, offering to buy the house for $120,000 cash. James's heart sped up. Mrs. Mary Ann, can I see you today? I need to understand this situation better. Of course, I'm here until 5 p.m. James cancelled all his appointments and headed to the real estate agency. Mary Ann was a middle-aged lady who greeted him with a confused look on her face. "Mr. Foster, I must confess I was surprised by your call. I thought you had already given up on the deal. Please, show me this document." Mary Ann opened a folder and handed him a paper. It was a purchase offer with his signature, or a very well-made forgery, offering $120,000 for the house on Maple Street. "Mrs. Mary Ann, this is not my signature. Someone is using my name fraudulently, but the man who brought the offer said he was your authorized accountant. He even showed a power of attorney." "What man?" "A gentleman with glasses, well-dressed, Stephen something, I don't remember his last name." James felt a cold knot in his stomach. "Stephen Barnes? That's him, you know him?" "Unfortunately, yes." James studied the house address, 247 Maple Street. Why did that address seem familiar? "Mrs. Mary Ann, can I see this house?" "Of course. It's been empty for 5 years, since the last owners moved out. It's an old house, needs a lot of repairs." They drove to the address, and when James saw the house, recognition hit him like a bolt of lightning. It was the house where he had lived with his parents until he was 17. The house where, according to Richard, his father had hidden 20 gold bars in the basement. "My God," he murmured. "You know the house, Mr. Foster?" "I lived here as a child." James observed the dilapidated structure, the broken windows, the garden overrun with weeds. "Who are the current owners?" "A company called Future Minas Investments. They bought it 5 years ago from a family who had inherited the property." James knew he had to act quickly. If Stephen was trying to buy the house using his name, it meant he had found out about the gold hidden in the basement and was trying to retrieve it before James could claim his rightful inheritance. "Mrs. Mary Ann, I want to make a real offer for the house. $150,000 cash with a closing in 48 hours. The woman's eyes widened. "Sir, that's 30,000 more than the other offer. So, do we have a deal?" That night, James gathered Robert, Helen, and the children in the living room to tell them about his discovery. The children listened with wide eyes, especially when he explained about the hidden gold. "So, we're going to be rich?" Oscar asked innocently. "You're already rich," James replied, stroking the boy's hair. "Rich is having a family that loves you." Leo, ever mature for his age, asked the question everyone was thinking, "But if we get the gold, what are we going to do with it?" James looked at the 10 children who had turned his empty life into something full of purpose and joy. "We're going to use it to ensure you have the best education possible, that you never lack for anything, and that you can achieve all your dreams." Robert was reviewing contracts at the kitchen table. "James, I managed to speed up the paperwork for the house. We can sign tomorrow morning. But there's one thing that worries me." "What's that?" "Stephen won't give up easily. When he finds out he lost the house to you, he might try something desperate." As if Robert's words were prophetic, the house phone rang at that exact moment. James answered and heard Stephen's cold voice. "James, we need to talk." "We have nothing to talk about, Stephen." "I think we do, especially about a certain house on Maple Street that you just bought." "How did you know about that?" Stephen laughed unpleasantly. "I have my contacts. Listen carefully, James. That house belongs to me by right. My father worked for your father for years, helped hide that gold. I have as much right to it as you do. Your father was a thief, just like you. Watch your words, James. You have 10 children under your care now. It would be a shame if something happened to them." The line went dead, and James felt a chill run down his spine. That had been a direct threat to the children. Robert, who had overheard the conversation, was already dialing the police. "We're filing a report on this threat immediately." But before they could do anything, Helen ran into the kitchen. "James, someone slashed your car tires and broke all the front windows of the house." They ran to the window and saw the damage. On the car's windshield, a message was written in red paint. "Give up or pay the price." "He's lost it," Robert murmured. "Stephen has completely lost control." James looked at the children who had huddled behind him, frightened by the noise and commotion. Lily held her bear teddy and watched him with confident eyes, as if she knew he would protect them from any harm. "Helen, take all the children to the back room and lock the door," he ordered. "Robert, call the police and the security guards. Let's end this once and for all." "What are you going to do?" Robert asked. "I'm going to get back what's ours," James said with steely determination. "And I'm going to make sure Stephen can never threaten these children again." But even as he made these brave plans, James knew he was entering a dangerous phase of the battle against Stephen. The man had lost everything: his reputation, his schemes, the chance to get rich easily. And desperate men were the most dangerous of all. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, as if nature itself sensed the storm that was about to break over their lives. The morning of the house signing dawned grey and heavy, as if the sky reflected the tension that hung over everyone. James had spent a sleepless night, planning every move with Robert and the newly hired security guards. The children stayed home with Helen and 2 guards, while he and the lawyer went to finalize the purchase of the property. At the real estate agency, Mary Ann awaited them with a stack of papers and a worried expression. "Mr. Foster, we had a strange situation this morning. Stephen Barnes showed up here at 7 o'clock trying to stop the sale. He said there were irregularities in the documents." "What kind of irregularities?" Robert asked. He couldn't specify. He seemed desperate, almost unhinged. I had to call security to remove him. James and Robert exchanged significant glances. Stephen was truly losing control, which made him even more dangerous. The signing was completed without further incident, and by 10 in the morning, James officially held the key to the house where he had grown up. But before going there, he made an important stop. At the county clerk's office, Robert had prepared all the necessary documents to formalize the adoption of the 10 children. With the evidence of Stephen's conspiracy and Dr. Cassidy's testimony, the process had been extraordinarily expedited. "James Foster," the clerk said solemnly, "are you certain you wish to assume legal responsibility for these 10 children?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," he replied without hesitation. When they returned home with the signed adoption papers, the children greeted them with an explosion of joy. Leo, now 13 and increasingly like his father in his generous personality, was the first to hug him. "Are you our real dad now?" Lily asked, clutching her bear teddy. "For real," James confirmed, picking her up. "Forever." But the celebration was cut short when Helen received a worrying call. It was Dr. Cassidy with alarming news. "Helen, I need to speak with James urgently. Stephen Barnes was at the hospital this morning claiming to be the Stevens children's lawyer. He tried to access Richard's medical records, alleging he needed them for a court case." James took the phone. "Dr. Cassidy, did he get any information?" "No, because I didn't believe his story." But James, he wasn't well. He was speaking incoherently about hidden treasures and justice. "I think he might be having some kind of mental breakdown." The situation was becoming more serious than they had imagined. Robert suggested they wait a few more days before going to the house, but James knew they couldn't delay. Every day that passed was another day for Stephen to devise some desperate plan. That afternoon, leaving the children safe at home with Helen and the guards, James and Robert headed to Maple Street. The house looked even gloomier than on their first visit, with its broken windows like empty eyes watching the quiet street. "Are you sure you want to do this now?" Robert asked as James opened the rusty gate. "The longer we wait, the more time Stephen has to plan something worse," James replied, pushing open the front door, which creaked in protest. The inside of the house was in a deplorable state. Peeling wallpaper, loose floorboards, furniture covered in 5 years of dust and neglect. But for James, every corner awakened memories of a happy childhood alongside his parents. "The basement is this way," he said, opening a door that led to a wooden staircase. They carefully descended the steps, which groaned under their feet. The basement was dark and damp, smelling of mold and abandonment. James turned on his phone's flashlight and began to examine the stone walls, searching for the spot indicated on Richard's map. "According to the drawing, it should be on this north wall," he murmured, running his hands over the ancient stones. It was Robert who noticed it first. "James, some of these stones looked like they'd been recently removed and put back." They examined them more closely and found that several stones were loose, as if someone had tried to dig there. Carefully, they began to remove the stones one by one. Behind the third layer, the flashlight beam revealed a rectangular hole containing a rusty metal box. With his heart pounding, James pulled it out. Inside the box, wrapped in oiled canvas, were 20 gold bars, each stamped with the seal of the old U.S. Mint. It was more wealth than James had ever imagined possessing. "My God," Robert whispered, "your father really did it." "He saved it all to secure my future," James said with tears in his eyes, "and now it will secure the children's future too." But as they were carefully placing the gold bars into a backpack Robert had brought, a sound made them freeze, footsteps on the floor above. "Someone's in the house," Robert whispered. The footsteps were heading toward the basement door. James quickly zipped up the backpack, and the two of them positioned themselves behind the staircase, their hearts racing. The door opened, and a familiar voice echoed down the stairs. "I know you're down there. I saw your car on the street." It was Stephen, but his voice sounded different, unstable, almost hysterical. "Come out of there now. That gold belongs to me as much as it does to you." James exchanged a look with Robert and made a decision. "Stephen, come down here. Let's talk like civilized people." Civilized. Stephen's laugh echoed disturbingly through the basement. "You ruined my life. 15 years working for you, 15 years of planning, and you think you can just take everything that's mine?" Stephen stumbled down the stairs. When James's phone light hit him, they could see the man was clearly in crisis. His hair was disheveled, his glasses crooked, his clothes rumpled as if he hadn't slept in days. "Stephen," James said calmly, "this gold belonged to my father. He hid it here for me." "Your father owed my father money when he died. My father told me everything. He had a right to a part of that gold. Even if that were true, you had no right to blackmail Richard and terrorize his children." "The children?" Stephen laughed bitterly. "I was doing them a favor. Brenda would have given them a better life than a poor custodian." "You were using them to get to the gold," Robert accused. "And when that didn't work, you tried to buy them through document forgery." Stephen moved closer, and they could see the desperation in his eyes. "You don't understand. I invested everything in this plan. I spent my savings bribing people, forging documents, keeping Brenda in line. Now I have nothing." "You always had a choice," James said firmly. "You could have been honest. You could have worked hard. You could have built a decent life." "Honest?" Stephen screamed. "Like you? Inheriting everything from Daddy while I worked like a slave for scraps?" "I didn't inherit anything, Stephen. I was orphaned at 17 and built everything with my own hard work. You chose the path of dishonesty." It was then that Stephen did something unexpected. He began to cry. Not tears of anger or frustration, but deep sobs from a man who finally understood the magnitude of his wrong choices. I've lost everything," he murmured. "My reputation, my job, my clients. And for what? For gold that I'm not even sure was ever rightfully mine." Robert approached cautiously. "Stephen, there's still time to do the right thing. Confess everything. Cooperate with the justice system. Ask for forgiveness from the children you tried to hurt." Stephen was silent for a long moment, staring at the backpack that held the gold. Finally, he nodded slowly. "You're right," he said in a broken voice. I became a monster. Richard was a good man, and I destroyed his life out of greed." 3 months later, on a sunny April morning, James watched from his garden as the 10 children played in the yard. With the money from the gold, he had expanded the property, created individual rooms for each of them, and established an education fund that would ensure they could all attend the best universities in the country. Stephen had confessed everything, received a sentence of supervised release, and now worked as a volunteer accountant for a charity that helped families in need. Brenda had disappeared from town after the whole truth came out, leaving only a letter of apology for the children she had mistreated. Leo, now 14, was helping James with the management of the candy factory, showing a natural talent for business. Alex had discovered a passion for reading and dreamed of becoming a writer. Chloe and Daisy were inseparable and talked about becoming teachers like Dr. Cassidy, who had become a close family friend. Oscar and the twins, Claire and Asher, filled the house with energy and mischief, while Benny, now almost 3, ran after everyone trying to keep up. Rosie, at 2.5, was the family's darling, especially for Helen, who had become a devoted grandmother figure. And Lily, his little Lily, now 5, still carried her bear Teddy everywhere, but it was no longer out of fear. It was because, as she explained to James, "Teddy likes to see our family happy." James smiled, watching the scene that warmed his heart. He had started the year as a lonely man, embittered by loss. Now he was surrounded by 10 children who had brought joy, purpose, and love into his life. Lily ran up to him, climbing into his lap as she did every morning. "Daddy James, are you happy?" He hugged her tight, breathing in the scent of children's shampoo in her curly hair. "I'm happier than I ever imagined possible, my little one." "Me too," she said, snuggling into his arms. "Now we have a real family, right?" "The best family in the world," he confirmed, looking at the other 9 children who had gathered around them. And there, in that sunny yard, surrounded by the children that fate had placed in his path, James Foster finally understood that sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as the greatest challenges, that true love knows no bounds of blood or origin, and that a family is built not just with biological ties, but with daily choices of care, protection, and dedication. The story that had begun with abandonment and despair ended with hope and redemption, proving that when generous souls meet, miracles really can happen. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you so much.